Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being patient. I know this took a couple minutes. We have Dr. Mark Ramsey here. He's going to spend the next hour or so talking about the title of the session. The Chat GPT-4 effect, redefining data strategies and platforms with advanced generative AI for competitive edge. I ask that you please silence your devices so there are no distractions during the way, and hold any questions for the end where Dr. Ramsey will take them for you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Great, thanks. So they're pulling up the presentation, and while that's happening, has anyone heard of Chat GPT? Or generative AI, or as the new cool thing is, Gen AI. So my intent of the session today is to kind of go through a little bit of the background quickly for those of you who maybe haven't kind of had a chance to get into this a little bit, and there's still questions about what it is and why are people so excited about it. And then kind of take you through, we've built a solution around generative AI to show how there's some possibilities of how this can really be used, and actually how it impacts data strategy. And what I mean by data strategy is when you're in an organization and you're trying to figure out really how to use data as a strategic asset and drive maximum value from that information, that to me is a data strategy. And then you kind of have to have the technologies and the culture and the plans and all of that. So for those of you that are chief data officers, my personal belief is that you really have to incorporate this emerging technology into how you're thinking about data strategy in the organization. And so that's really what we're going to try to walk away with. And I'm going to kind of share some things and little bits and pieces about the whole large language model that you may or may not be familiar with. I mean, I guess with a show of hands, how many folks consider themselves, experts in GPT and large language model and things and have even implemented solutions? So, okay, one, maybe two. Okay, cool. How many folks, are aware of it but just haven't had a chance yet to, go in and do things with it, and they've read some stuff, but they, and okay, so I mean, probably, the rest of you kind of in the middle somewhere. I mean, and I'll actually, for those of you who haven't actually seen Chat GPT, I'll show you and kind of how that all works. But I think there's a lot of confusion because I've heard a lot of things about, oh, be careful with Chat GPT because you're going to disclose all your information and they're going to use it to train their model, and then anybody on the planet can see your stuff and all that. And a lot of that is kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so for the sake of time, since we kind of got a little bit of late start, I'll just keep this short. But I've basically focused on data and analytics for the last 30 plus years. Have been the chief data officer at GlaxoSmithKline. I was the chief data officer for Samsung Mobile. Was with IBM for 20 years, focused on data and analytics. And so I really, the way I explain to folks is I've spent my entire career in data and analytics. And now is where it's really cool, right? So it's taken this long to get to the point where data and analytics is really super cool. And so for the last several years, I've had a company, and there's a few of us that we kind of bring together and really help organizations on how to leverage data, how to build platforms, how to really make use of this kind of technology. And so a few years ago, we created a solution. For those of you that are familiar with Cloudera, we created a full automation solution that rapidly deploys in the cloud, those kinds of solutions, and that's itself kind of cool. But the last year, we've been focused on really putting together a way to incorporate large language models into what enterprises would really want to do with them, which is a lot of people talk about chat, and we'll show that, but it's also how do you incorporate these kinds of things into a workflow, right? So you get to a certain point, and then you reach out to a model, it does some stuff, it gives you an answer, and then the workflow continues on. And so, this is a little example at the bottom where it's like, well, what is CDP? And it gives you an answer. I think a lot of people are comfortable with the concept of a chat, and they think that's what a large language model really is all about. And that's just such a small piece that I think we want to spend a little bit of time on, let's broaden that a little bit, and let's talk about what's really required if you're going to deliver a solution using large language models. And so I'm going to do a little bit about OpenAI's work. If you've heard this term embeddings, I'll kind of demystify that and explain what it is. It's pretty easy to understand when you get your head around it. And then how do you really use embeddings as part of a solution? And then I'll do a little bit of a demo, which is why we were having a little bit of a scramble here. I'm I guess a risky guy. I want to do a live demo of this technology on a hotel Wi-Fi network. What could possibly go wrong, right? So OpenAI, the whole concept of GPT, it's generative pre-trained transformers. So if we go back in time a little bit, if you look at everything that happened, there was a lot of work done on this concept of transformers, and I've heard a lot of presentations where they say, oh, large language model, that's just a neural net. Well, you can oversimplify a lot of this, but there was a lot of work done for a lot of years that then ultimately led to 2018, where the first generative model was released. And actually, it wasn't just one model. It was a whole portfolio of models, because the types of questions that you were trying to ask, you had to tell it which of those models really you would go to and how you would use that model, which was interesting, and it was just getting started. And then if we go to 2019, everyone remembers 2019, right? The year before the event. And that was GPT-2. That began to consolidate some of these transformers and these models, so you didn't have to abstract them as much. 2020 was GPT-3. GPT-3, billions of components to the model, and so it was really starting to have a much more effective way in a communication. So, I would kind of say GPT-3, maybe it communicates like, I don't know, if a 5-year-old would communicate. So, it was doing interesting things in the response, but it was still had ways to go, right? So, and then there was another iteration. And so, again, just to keep this moving, we got to this event in 2022 where OpenAI released a chatbot to begin to interface with these. And this was an interesting point, because literally the adoption rate of ChatGPT was the fastest adoption of anything that we've ever seen, right? So it took Netflix 3.5 years to go to 1 million users. It took ChatGPT 5 hours. Even, I think I know it's a little bit of an eye chart, but Instagram, it took 2.5 months to get Instagram to 1 million users. And what's really interesting is ChatGPT, they limited the adoption, right? So it could have even been, who would know how far this would have gone if they were able to actually support it? Because OpenAI is a new company, they're trying to get their infrastructure up and running. So, but they got to 1 million in 5 hours, which kind of blew everyone out of the water. So, there's got to be something to this, right? And I think the defining event, at least from my perspective, is in just March of 2023, which, you scratch your head and say, well, that was not that long ago. March of 2023 was the release of GPT-4. And I think when we go forward 10 years, we're going to look back and say that's a pivotal point in the history of technology, of things that happened before GPT-4 and everything that's happened after GPT-4. Because for the first time, this technology has advanced to the point where you can do some, what I characterize as pretty amazing things. Like I said, I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've seen technologies come and go. A lot of us in this room experienced the big data era, which we all were kind of scratching our heads saying, well, that's all marketing hype, and why are we even talking about this stuff? But it was really good to kind of get some buzz going. This to me is pivotal, right? So, and the reason for that is that it actually incorporates an ability to do things that, if you properly take advantage of it, the solutions are just, for me, it's mind-blowing what you can do. So, but there's a couple of pieces to it that I want to call out. One is, if you've heard context length, right? So we see this up here, that GPT-4 has 8,000 token contexts. And think of a context as you're interacting with the model, you're limited to that context level, right? So with GPT-4, for most folks, it's 8,000 tokens. Okay, the next question is, well, what's a token? Well, you can kind of think of a token, it's not equivalent to a word because some words are long and they get broken into multiple tokens. But in effect, you know, if you say you have this 8,000 token limit, even if we just said it's 8,000 words, you could drop it by maybe 25%. So let's say it's 7,000 words in your mind. That's the entire communication size that you can have with the model. Now, when you ask the question, you'd like to get an answer back, right? So you have to allocate tokens of how much size do you want the model to answer. What I'm going to show you here in a few minutes, we allocate 1,000 tokens for the answer, which means it gives us a decent size for a reasonable answer. I mean, you could allocate it down to 1 token or 2 tokens, just ask a yes or no question, you know, and so you have to keep that into mind. And the other thing is, you've probably heard a lot about prompt engineering, right? So if you boil that all down, really it's what you push to the model, including your question, but what are you pushing to the model to get it to do, right? So when you're typing in something like ChatGPT, you type in the question, that becomes your prompt, right? So if it's like, you know, who is Mark Ramsey? And you put that in ChatGPT, your prompt is pretty short. But what we're going to talk about is you're also going to get less accurate results if you do it that way, because the other piece is that the model is limited to the knowledge that it was trained on. And some people see that as a negative, but I think as enterprises look at ways to take advantage of this technology, I don't actually think we're going to leverage a lot of the model knowledge. We're going to provide it knowledge and have it incorporate that information into the answer. And so that's all about this embedding that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. But so keep in mind tokens, or the size of that discussion, but that's the entire size as we're having the interaction. So we can't just give ChatGPT or any of these models, you know, a novel and say, here's the novel, read it and summarize it. Everything has to be incorporated into this communication size, which is something that we have to factor in as we're building solutions. The other thing we have to do, and I'm sure you've, you know, as you've seen this, you know, everyone likes to talk about hallucinations, right? Well, that if the model can't answer the question, it just makes up an answer, which is true, right? If you go into an unconstrained, like a ChatGPT, and you ask a question, I kind of think of it as it really wants to answer that question. And so it wants to answer that question so bad that if you don't give it some instructions, it will come up with an answer that sounds extremely plausible, but could be completely it could be just made up. You know, I guess hallucination sounds better than lying, right? But basically the model is lying to you based on, you know, it sounds really good. I mean, it will make up references, it looks really good. But you have to keep in mind that these models, they're not aware of what the response is, right? It's a mathematical exercise, and it's bringing together the response based on a whole neural net. It isn't thinking, right? It isn't looking at all this and thinking and making a decision. It's doing it all through mathematics and neural nets. So, but it wants to have that correlation, so it does hallucinations. Now, this is one of the reasons why I would strongly encourage organizations not to use ChatGPT. Use the APIs so that you can send the message and coordinate and organize the way that you're interacting. I mean, the model is incredible. ChatGPT is just a way to kind of show you the art of the possible, but if you're actually doing this within your organization, you definitely want to use the API interface, and you want to have a lot more control over the way you're interacting with the model. So I've shown some examples here at the bottom. This is what we actually feed into the interaction that we have with the model, and you're actually telling it. So think of this almost like a programming language, but you're talking to the model. You're like, hey, if you can't find the answer, tell me you don't know, which seems like that would be like an easy thing to do, but you have to tell the model that that's how you want it to behave. Don't make up answers. Be honest, be concise. Those are the kinds of things. And when you hear prompt engineering, That's really what this is. It's coming up with these messages that help you organize and control how you're interacting with the model. And the second one there, it's like, always strive to provide truthful answers, and if uncertain about an answer, please respond, I'm not able to answer accurately the question. Then if you don't tell the model that, then it will make up the answer. The other thing is, you may have heard something about this thing called temperature. Again, it's a new technology, so we got to make up all these names that make it seem like temperature is really telling the model that in the response, how creative do you want the model to be in responding? So I think that's interesting, and you can do that. So if you ask the same question, and if you set the temperature high, you will get a different answer every time you ask the question. That's kind of what creativity is. I set it to 0, which means, I guess, no temperature, or it means that I don't want it to be creative. I want it to give me an answer, and I want it to be the same answer every time, or pretty close. I mean, you can't force it to always be exactly the same answer, but temperature 0 means that, don't be adding to what you're doing. Okay, so embeddings. How many folks have heard of embeddings and know everything about them? Okay, their hands quickly went down after the hurting, but okay, so I'm going to keep this relatively short, but I'm sure you've all heard about why vector databases are a big part of using large language models. So again, you're limited on the amount of text that you can provide the model as a way to have it incorporate that into its answer. And so vectors and embeddings are the way that you provide that information to the model. So the way to think about it is, think about a PDF document that any PDF document that you think you might be interested in. Let's say it's 30 pages long. What an embedding would do is it would take that 30-page document and it would break it into chunks. And typically those chunks are 200 to 1,000 tokens in length. And then you would take that chunk and you would vectorize it. And what vectorizing means is like the little illustration at the bottom, which is, we tried to keep it really simple, but let's say you had, cat, dog, apple, whatever. Vectorizing takes those words and turns them into numeric values. And then when you compare the numeric values, you can use something like cosine similarity, and it will see the closeness of the numbers mean that the text is aligned or close. And this gives you a way to very quickly retrieve information that has text about the question that you're asking. So, and that's as simple as that, right? So because we're limited on the amount, you have to take documents and break them into chunks. You vectorize those chunks and you store those vectors in a vector database. What I'm going to show you is using a vector database by the name of Pinecone. It's a software as a service. You fire it up, it's easy to use, it's quick. So we take many documents, we break them into chunks, we vectorize them, we store them in Pinecone. So then they're ready to be used. And then the trick is, how do you link this stuff all together? So the way what I'm going to show you works is, first you prepare your embeddings. This is kind of a batch operation. So we have, in the example that I'm going to show you, we have 200 or 300 documents, like PDF files, PowerPoint, Word documents, all that kind of stuff. And we have a bunch of websites and links and things, like any information about data management, Daedalus, which is the product we created, Cloudera, all that kind of stuff. We give it all of that information, and we unleash this process that takes all of that stuff, breaks it into chunks, vectorizes it, puts those vectors in the vector database. So we have about 250 some sources. That equates to, I think, right around 3,000 or 4,000 chunks of data that get stored in the vector database. So that all happens, and now I guess one other thing is, like for GPT-4 and actually the OpenAI models, they vectorize at a certain dimensionality. And so you can kind of think of it, the more dimensionality, the more granular you know about the text that's in that chunk. So GPT, the models, they vectorize at 1,536 vector dimensions. I don't know why I remember that, but that's what it is. And every model is going to be potentially slightly different. So this is where when people talk about multiple models, that's interesting, but you have to keep in mind that you have to vectorize to the level to match the model. And so when we go through this vectorization process, we're calling an API from OpenAI and saying, here is 400 or 500 or 1,000 tokens, create an embedding, and it gives us back that embedding vectorization. So that's something that's a call that goes into OpenAI. And so when we store this information in Pinecone, we store the vector, which is, remember, all those numbers that we've converted it to, and it stores the text. So if it's our PDF document, it's a chunk of our PDF document, and the embedding gets stored in Pinecone. So now we're ready. So now we have our API call, or we're gonna use this material, and the process is that you type in a question like, what are the financial results for Apple in this month, or whatever, you come up with a question based on that PDF document you were thinking about, or a collection of PDF documents. So you ask the question. Step number 1, you call the same API of OpenAI and you vectorize the question. So now you have your question and it's turned into those numbers. Then you make a call to Pinecone and you say, give me the top 10 or 15 or 20 matches that have the closest affiliation to my question. And so let's say your question is, who is Mark Ramsey? It'll take those words, split it into tokens, vectorize it, go into the documents, and it'll pull everything that relates to Mark Ramsey, blah, 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 and it brings back any text that is aligned to that. So then let's say we pull 10. If we're vectorizing 500 token chunks, we pull back 10 chunks. That's 5,000 tokens. Remember our earlier discussion, we're limited to 8,000 tokens, plus we minus for 1,000 on our response. So we can provide like 5,000 tokens worth of current source content that we've pulled out of those documents. And then we say, GPT-4, here's some stuff that relates to the question that I've asked. Use that stuff to answer the question. You can also say, oh, by the way, you've got a lot of knowledge that you've loaded. It's before September 2021, but you've got a lot of knowledge. You can use that too, but prioritize what I'm giving you. Now, again, if you're building this for your organization, you may say, forget about all the knowledge that you've loaded in your model. Just use the current source. Just answer the question based on what I'm giving you. So you can do it both ways, depending on how creative, how broad you want. For the solution I'm going to show you, we use both. We've done it both ways. And so all of that goes to the chat model, and it formulates an answer. And for those of you who have done some things with like chat GPT interface, it kind of looks like a teletype, right? It's coming across. Well, what's happening is you've given it this knowledge, it's processing it, and it will deliver every token as its neural net is delivering an answer. So that's why you get like this teletype look, is that that's how you can kind of think that behind the curtain, the brain or the model is processing, and every token that it comes up with in the sequence, it's putting on the screen, which is kind of cool because you can see how fast the model is actually working as it's creating this answer for you. But that's the way the process works. So it uses the embeddings, pushes all that information up, pulls it together, uses it for its answer, delivers the answer package back. Now, a lot of times when you talk about chatting, you want context, right? So you want to ask a question, it gives you an answer, and then you want to ask a follow-on, right? Like, well, what about blah, blah, blah? The only way that works is that you have to include the answer that it gave you in the question back in the context, because the model has no reference. I mean, it doesn't remember anything. So The interesting thing about that is, remember our 8,000 tokens. So if we're going to give it history and we're going to give it new information to answer the follow-on, your space just keeps getting less. Now, one of the things that I'll show you, which is pretty wild, is let's say you passed it 5,000 tokens and you ask a follow-on, but now in the follow-on, your follow-on question was bigger, and so now you don't have space to give it the 5,000 original tokens plus the answer plus the follow-on. We actually call the model to say, summarize this knowledge that we gave you the first time from 5,000 down to whatever, 3,000, 2,000, whatever, but use the model to do the summarization so you can, so it's like feeding on itself and you're helping summarize the information each time you go through the interaction. So I think that's something that sometimes people may not realize, is that you can actually use the model multiple times in this kind of path, if you will. So are we ready to see if this is going to work? All right. I have a backup plan, but if it doesn't, but all right, can we see if we can switch over? Okay. Is it? Oh, there we go. That's going to be interesting. Okay. Yeah, I just need to change it to from extended to. I don't think I can. Yeah, but then I can't see it's a problem, so let's see. It's what you get with a group full of technical people, right? Everybody's it's like, here's the answer, man. Just do this. And then I've got right here where it says extended. Just get rid of that and make it mirror. Duplicate. There we go. Keep the changes. Okay, so you get a or not. Okay. Okay, so while they're figuring out what I messed up, so I'm going to show you a couple things. One is I'm going to go into GPT chat, which remember I told you never to use if you're building it for an enterprise, but it's great for demos and getting your friends and family excited about the capability. And I'll show you like why the model doesn't have answers to things that I might care about, because the model is trained through September of 2021, and it's trained on many sources. In fact, everyone's seen how there's lawsuits now about they've trained on data that's copyrighted and all that, and that stuff will all flush itself out. But the important thing is I kind of separate it into two bits. Like one is I'm less concerned about the data that it's trained on and it having all this knowledge base. That's marginally interesting. What I'm more interested in is the fact that because of the volume of the data that it's been trained on, it does a very good job of formulating, understanding the question, responding to the question. That, to me, is why it's more important on the breadth of the knowledge that it's been trained on. So if you take, one of the local models, they will do okay if you say what is an apple? And you've provided the data or it's trained on the data and it'll come back and tell you what an apple is, right? What it doesn't do a very good job of is create a scenario of three people, Alan, Sally, and Joe, and they're having these different perspectives on this content, and have them debate, and then you as an informal advisor make a decision as to who had the best argument. I mean, those models will be like, what? You've got to have that depth in order to really use the models for that. A lot more complicated, a lot more inference in the discussion. So that to me is why it's important to have the models that have such a large amount of input content. Sure.
So is there a way to get a factor?
Just get a mic, please.
Sorry.
Who was asking the question?
So is there a way to get a confidence factor on the response?
Yes, in a couple of ways, right? So a lot of times people say, well, hey, these models don't have traceability, we don't know how they work and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this is not a propensity model type of a problem, right? So, but what you can do, which I think is pretty cool, is you can actually have the model report back what chunks it used to formulate the answer. And you can also show the similarity score of the chunks that were brought back to provide to the model to answer. Because keep in mind, this problem, there's two pieces of this problem. So when we normally talk about models, we're wanting to know like confidence of the prediction, right? Keep in mind, this is a conversational model. So what we're really interested in is, can you turn content that I'm giving you into a conversation that you give me back something that feels like a human is telling me? So if I understand the content that I gave you and just make sure that that is relevant and that we're not giving the model something that kind of sends it off a path that is not appropriate, that's about as best as you're going to be able to do, right? But I think that's for what, again, it's like making sure the right tool is used to answer the right problem. This is not doing like cross-sell prediction or probability of churn, those kinds of things. This is a conversational environment. And the other thing that the model is really good at, which we may or may not see, is we've trained the model on writing SQL. We've trained the model on, like I mentioned, we do work with Cloudera's CDP platform. Well, it has a it has an API. So we trained the model on the API, and then we built an extension in our chat so I can basically say, tell me this about the environment, and the model says, for this kind of question, I need to engage a function, but here's the command that needs to get run, and then the function actually runs the command, brings the result back, repackages it in the model, and gives me an answer. And so it's not the model running the command, but the model is actually creating the command that needs to run. The other thing is that, and the reason I think it's really cool around data strategy is one of the big things around data strategy is metadata, right? Knowing your data, about your data and where it's located, and quality problems and all that kind of stuff. And so we also hooked the model into the Modak Naboo product, which is a metadata capturing. It's got automated metadata capture, and they have a really cool fingerprinting technology that auto tags the columns. Well, we can then say, which I'll either show you or you can visualize, is that I can ask a question saying, show me the databases that contain Social Security number data. And it actually queries the metadata catalog, repackages, and gives me the answer back in the chat of these databases contain data that appear to be Social Security number based on the fingerprinting tag of the metadata repository. And then you can start, so it's the kinds of things that you would do, but you don't have to write the SQL query. The model is actually writing the query that gets executed against the database to give you that information. So it greatly simplifies this interaction and so you begin to feel like you're having a conversation with your data, right? Because most people, when they mess around with these chat models, they see it as a replacement to Google, right? Oh, I'll ask a question, it'll give me an answer back. Well, yeah, that's part of it, but the advancement of being able to do role play and do additional work, that's really where the magic is, right? And like I said at the beginning, I've been pretty pessimistic about lots of technologies, right? We will all remember March of 2023 and the capabilities, because the things that can be done. And so, technology always gets overhyped, and people are like, oh, it's not about the technology, it's about the business use case. And I agree with all those things, except for when you reach a pivotal point in technology to where there are things that can be done that we just literally have never been able to do. And every company is going to be figuring out how to take advantage of, and that doesn't mean every company is going to build a chat, right? It means that you're going to come up with ways to interact with your data in a very different way than you've ever been able to do before. And I think that's the thing that, for me, is phenomenal. But enterprises need to figure out, the phrase that I've used for years is that, analytics is great, but it's icing on the cake. You have to bake the cake first. this is just going to show companies that data is the cake, and you still have to have data to feed these models. Now, you can get that data in a variety of ways, and the data that you're feeding into the model is very different, but you still have to have that data. And so it's going to make the acquisition and the ability to feed data into the model even more important within organizations, and then the abilities that you can deliver in the model are that's really where the value is going to come out of it. So, yes. Oh, yep. Sorry. Wait for the mic. Powerball. I don't know, but you'd be the second person that I would tell.
Hey, Mark, or hey, stranger.
Yeah.
So going back to your last point on traditional enterprise data management, and sort of curious to get your view on all the boring stuff around governance, ontology creation, since the GPT models do contextual search now or semantic search in the background. How do you see that entire space transforming? I know it's too early, but maybe a forward-looking question.
I don't know that it's too early, right? I mean, there's a lot of technology that the focus on the technology was to be taking information and trying to categorize the information, package it in certain ways. Again, one of the things that we may or may not see is we created different personalities for this environment, which is basically switching. Think of it as switching the vector database that goes into answering the question between different vector databases, and we call them personalities. So the personality that we may or may not see is modern data management, right? So it's loaded with a lot of things about, like I mentioned earlier, about data and how all that works. We also created a personality on life sciences, right? And the way I did that was I took a small number of data sources, like the ICD-10 codes and a listing of all the diseases and the genes that are affiliated with those diseases and stuff like that, and then basically just read it. And then, I can ask questions now that are very applicable for a scientist to ask just by reading that in. And the reason I bring that up as an example is if I read in the ICD-10 codes, I could then read in a document and say, use the ICD-10 codes to quantify and create the ontologies for this document. And then, the other thing to think about is you can, one of the challenges we've always had is how do you take unstructured data and you put the metadata, or a lot of times people call it structuring unstructured data, but how do you do that so that you can get value out of massive amounts of unstructured data? This is, with the GPT level, you can actually ask the model to quantify the document and categorize it, summarize it down to a paragraph, and give you the topics that were discussed in the document that match to which ICD-10 codes. That kind of stuff is very applicable to the yeah,
We can take one more question from online.
I'll
Yep.
take a question.
What about privacy? If you feed your data even in the form of embeddings that could be sensitive, how do you ensure data confidentiality and privacy?
Yeah, I get a little frustrated on this question, quite frankly, because privacy is important, right? But I think people are using it as a cheat to protect you from. No. So first of all, if you go into ChatGPT, and again, I suggest you don't use that for your organizational things, but if you go in there, there's a setting that says, don't use my data to train the model, don't store my data. Click that box. It's just like if you go into Google and you don't want them to know where you are, what do? We change the setting. But then guess what happens? They don't know where we are, they can't tell us where to go, they can't tell us where we've been, so suddenly we decide that it's good to share that information. Company is a little bit different. If you use the API, yes, you have to send the text to the API for it to formulate the answer. These are chunks of the data, and you have to send those into the model. Now, What we do is we encrypt the data in Pinecone and decrypt it coming out of Pinecone. So literally you're sending 10 chunks of however much size of data. The other thing I would encourage people to do is use a multi-model. So you can use a local model. So let's say you have customer data or patient data, and you literally can't send that to an API. Well, then use a local model to summarize the data into something that you can send, or anonymize it or something. So it's a multi-step process, but don't shoot the messenger, right? I mean, GPT-4 is, and again, I don't work for OpenAI. I mean, it sounds like it with all the hyping here, but it's an order of magnitude better than all these other models. And everybody keeps saying, oh, this local model is almost as, well, read the math, right? Almost as good as like a 30 or 40% effective rate compared to an 80+% effective rate. So it's not as almost as good. Someday maybe, but ain't today. So make sure that you come up with ways that you can share those chunks of data to get an answer to a question.
So maybe a little bit more training and data literacy around how to use it.
Yeah, and the tiering that you use in order to drive the answer. Yeah.
Yep.
But there's ways. I mean, keep in mind you're not sending all of your data. You know, and we're using Pinecone, but I would say localize your data repository. So have a vector database be local. We're not, because we're just doing it as an example. Oh, we get to show. Oh,
All right, we go back to the demo.
yeah, thanks. Okay, it's the monitor there. Okay, how am I doing on time? 3:30. I've got 15 minutes.
Something like that.
Okay.
35, but 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. This is what I get for doing a live demo. Okay, so this is Chat GPT with GPT-4, and I'm going to do what every person does. Whoops. Not mistype. It's like, who is Mark Ramsey, right? That's what we always do when we go into any of these things, is ask it what it knows about ourselves, right? And hopefully with all this gyration and all that, and yeah, it'll answer it at some point. Okay, cool. So it gave us an answer. I'm a boxing trainer. Ah, cool. Well-known figure in the radio broadcasting. Nobody knew that, especially me. Hey, a professional footballer. Okay. That's based on the knowledge that it loaded, stopped at 2021. Now, of course, I've been doing this for 35 years, so I'm a little insulted that it didn't, after all those years, it didn't at least come up and say something. But so that's the kind of stuff. Or the other question, I remember I told you we created this automation thing that we take to market. It's called Dataless. You know, I can say, what is Dataless? Yep. And I have high hopes that it's going to come back and announce to the world that we have this phenomenal product that's developed by, you know, whatever. And, you know, it is, again, going to use the knowledge base that, and it's also during the day is the most of the time that ChatGPT gets pounded on, so it does queue it up. But you get the point here, right? You don't really want to just go in and start asking questions. The context isn't there, and it's not really specialized. So, and so it, oh, what did it tell us? Something about, it's always going to say it's the Greek god of architecture, which is why we named the product that, but it doesn't really, yeah, Greek mythology. So, okay. Now let me see if I can actually go here and refresh. This is interestingly challenging. I can't really see what it's doing. And it's not. Okay. So I'm going to be really quick here, but like I can ask, who is Mark Ramsey? And I'm not doing this because I'm egotistical. I'm just doing this to show you a point. And this, what it's doing is it's taking the local documents, it's taking the question, it goes through that process I described, right? So then it, you know, basically takes the beddings, it finds those content things that matched up with my name, and it delivered something that's more in line with what I had hoped, right? And then I'll do the same thing about the dataless thing just to give you an example. What is dataless? And if you look in the upper right or upper left corner, you can see the steps that it's going through. It kind of tells you it's checking the validity of the question, it's getting the embeddings, it's answering the question, and then it gives us the answer. Can you even see it? Yeah, see up here where it says waiting for query? The reason I point that out is I wanted to show you that example I was saying about how you can tier these things. And so this will be fun, but if I say, what are my current CDP environments? Okay, so you'll see up in that corner that it's going to say validating the question, and then it's saying answering the question, then it's going to say calling a function. Well, just again so you know the flow before I hit the button is it takes that context, goes to, it takes the question, creates the vector, goes to Pinecone, pulls back that information, packages it up, sends it to OpenAI. OpenAI says, wait a minute, to answer this question, I need to invoke a function that I know about. And here's what the function needs. The function needs the call to get that answer from CDP. So the model creates the function, which in this case is CDP environments -- list environment, blah, blah, blah. There's a command to do that. Well, the model packages that up. It returns it and says, this isn't the answer. You need to call this function to get the answer. At that point, the program says, here's the function, here's the query. It calls the function, gets the answer back, which happens to be in JSON. It then calls the model again and says, here's what came back from the function. This is ugly, make it an answer. And so all of that's going to happen. And 3 days later, we're going to get an answer back, right? So you can see it in the upper left, that it's going through that process. And if things are lucky, it comes back and says, based on the current information, you have one source, it's called RI environment, it's running in the AWS cloud in that region. It was created today because I didn't want to have an environment sitting there burning cycles and not doing anything, but I thought it'd be nice to have it in a demo. So that's an example of this whole process. So it's iteratively calling, and you can actually do it. Now you would never, I don't know the business read, but I could say how many environments do I have running currently divided by the number of databases that contain social security number. It would do multiple function calls, answer both of those questions, put the question together, and give me the math results from that. So get your head around that one, right? That's the kind of stuff that these things are able to do, right? So I'm going to just show you the one more, and then we'll, like on the Naboo thing that I was telling about, so like what databases contain SSN data. And so same process, right? It's the model is building an SQL statement. The SQL statement's getting executed against a Postgres database, and it's telling me those are the 4 databases because the Naboo technology, this is actually a 5-way join to get this answer because the tags are in one table. So this is not like behind the scenes I've got a little database. I mean, we tried to make it like real, not some made up thing, right? So there's that. So we're on the home stretch, folks, here. So and so I'm going to ask the question, what is MS? And this is the data management personality. So what do you think it's going to say MS is? It's Microsoft, right? Okay, that's not exactly what I wanted to know, right? So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to pull the cartridge out of the brain. I'm going to say instead of modern data management, I want it to be pharma. And I'm going to clear the history so that I don't confuse it. And then I'm going to say, what is MS? And survey says it's probably not Microsoft. This is another example of, we've literally changed the whole perspective of the exact same chat by telling it the focus and the content that it's going to submit. And given that, I mean, I could go through and ask it about genes and all this, which was going to be part of the cool demo, but because of the shenanigans that we've been through, let's call it quit there. Let's switch back over to the presentation, if you don't mind. Okay. So okay. We've talked about a lot of this stuff, and you're going to get the materials in the Symposium deck or whatever, or let me know later and I'll send you the deck or whatever. But, you know, a lot of these things that people see as challenges, it's making sure that you implement this type of technology correctly. There's not a single thing on this list that can't be overcome by properly implementing the solution. If you wing it, then these challenges suddenly come, and that's where you end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, right? Making stupid decisions or whatever, which none of us want, right? But all of this stuff, whether it's hallucinations or non-reproducibility and all this kind of stuff, you can solve all of those by properly packaging the information. I'm not going to go through the hallucination example, although I can tell you it's getting better. And then on risk mitigation, again, it's really important to put guardrails around the things that you're doing, but don't let the publicity around some of these potential challenges stand in the way of really taking advantage of what's here. I mean, every organization today can bring data together that you could never bring together in the past and do it quickly and get that information. You know, think of it as finance and sales, and you can load the sales information and the sales teams can ask questions about the data. You're not trying to teach them how to use Salesforce. No disrespect to Salesforce, but those are not the things that those people typically like to use, right? So you can add this conversational, and then you can also package it up with applications. So you have a workflow, you get to a certain point, you pull the data, you run the model, it creates a letter, you send the letter to the individual, all done through automation through this type of an approach. And so with that, I'm going to stop there in case, I guess, do we have time for one question?
Oh, we have a lot of hands.
You're in charge now.
Thank you. Theoretically, I'm curious if you've tried taking the chat history and automating encrypting and vectorizing and uploading back into your database. Because couldn't then you have kind of a memory database that continually expands, and you could have that chat history?
We do. And that's what I'm showing you. We put that into a database, but you're limited, right? So how much do you want? It's a trade-off, right? You can put a lot of history, but then what if the person, that's why we put the little delete the history button, because that's when you hit that delete the history button, it's actually running a query to delete the database. Otherwise, it's pulling the history in up to the last 10 interactions, and that's variable. But you could actually run the model to say, here's my last history, summarize it, and then use that to send in. But yeah, that's what we're doing. There's different ways to do on the memory, but that's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
We have one more question?
Whatever. Hey, I'm here all day, so. If we don't melt, then we'll.
Mark,
Yes.
Great presentation. Bob Audette from Guidehouse. Real quickly, you mentioned the data is the cake in this scenario, and
Yes.
that data acquisition is going to be more important. How much does, you didn't mention data quality, how much does data quality influence the ultimate outputs that come out of these models, and how is that going to gain further importance in taking advantage of these new capabilities?
The first one, you're not going to like the answer, which is data quality is really not that important because it's been trained on so much, miscalculated, misspelled things that in formulating the text, the quality of that is not that high, right? Because it can work through that. I personally think you can leverage the models and the way this operates to actually be a process that can help you improve quality. Just like I was showing about things that were tagged to Social Security number, you can automate that where you're actually using the model to help identify through conversations, right? Because we used to talk about we're going to have an army of data stewards. And that never happened, right? We'd get a few data stewards, and then no one had budget to hire, another 100 data stewards because the quality, So you can do, AI augmented things to really address that. But the quality of the data going in, obviously, garbage in and garbage out, but as far as misspellings and some of the things that would really send a traditional model sideways, it doesn't have an impact on these.
There's one more question online. How do you establish firm-wide versus individual prompt guidelines? So, the don't lie or don't come back if you don't know the answer.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important. Like what I was showing you is sort of our attempt at having a framework for enterprises to be able to deploy these kinds of solutions. And what we've done is we've packaged those messages that I was sharing so that every interaction includes those messages. It's not optional, and but then you can have some other things that you include in the discussion. So I think it's extremely important that you have kind of a tiering to doing these, right? That every interaction has a set of standard kind of guardrails, and then individual applications may have other sets of guardrails. But I was extremely surprised, like that personality switch that I did. If you go into the prompt, it still says you're an AI assistant to help on data management, right? I didn't do anything there. I just literally changed the underlying data, and it's the pull that comes in from the vector database that changes the personality. So it's some of those things are pretty interesting. But I know we have to be conscious of the fact that there's another session. So what I will have to do is, I'm around. So if anybody has any questions, if you want to catch me, I just need to package this up so I'm out of people's way. But I'm happy to answer however many questions out. And then again, I'm going to be doing this session again at 11:30 tomorrow because there were so many people signed up that we thought that there would be a problem with the room size. So I'll do it again at 11:30. I know a lot of people are bailing today, so you want your questions asked. So catch me right outside by the little coffee area here, and we can chat. So anyway, thank you very much.